The battles of Jena and Auerstedt, which took place in 1806, are among the most significant engagements of the Napoleonic Wars. In these battles, the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte achieved a decisive victory over the Prussian army, leading to the collapse of Prussia as a major military power in Europe for several years. At the dawn of the 19th century, Europe was experiencing one of its most turbulent periods due to the French Revolution and its aftermath. Napoleon Bonaparte emerged as an exceptional leader and transformed France into a dominant military force, prompting many European nations to form alliances in an attempt to contain him. Following his resounding victory at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805 against Russia and Austria, the Third Coalition collapsed, and French dominance over large parts of Europe was solidified. As France's influence expanded, the Kingdom of Prussia began to feel increasingly threatened, especially after being forced to make diplomatic concessions in Napoleon's favor. In 1706, under mounting internal political pressure and growing nationalistic sentiment, King Frederick William III made the hasty and ill-considered decision to declare war on France, without strong backing from either Russia or Britain. Despite being one of Europe's oldest standing armies, the Prussian military was riddled with structural problems. Its tactics had not been updated since the days of Frederick the Great in the mid-18th century, making it far less adaptable than the French army, which had embraced new methods of warfare, emphasizing mobility and coordinated unit actions. Additionally, the Prussian command structure was disjointed, divided between traditionalist generals and younger officers who advocated for modern strategies. In contrast, the French army was at its peak. Napoleon had reorganized it in a way that allowed for greater flexibility and efficiency in combat. He relied on a corps system with semi-independent units capable of swift movement, granting him a decisive advantage on the battlefield. He also mastered the use of deception and maneuver to exhaust and trap his enemies in tactical ambushes. When Prussia declared war in the autumn of 1806, its forces advanced into Saxony, mistakenly believing they would face a weak and scattered French army. However, Napoleon had been closely tracking their movements and swiftly redeployed his troops in preparation for a decisive blow. The Prussian army split into two main forces, one under the Duke of Brunswick and the other under Prince Hohenlohe, offering Napoleon a golden opportunity to strike each separately. On October 14, 1806, the French engaged the Prussians in two simultaneous battles, one at Jena, led by Napoleon, and the other at Auerstedt, under Marshal Davout. Although the Prussian army was experienced in warfare, its sluggish movements and lack of coordination left it unable to match the speed of the French forces, leading to a devastating defeat in both engagements. At dawn on October 14, 1806, French and Prussian forces were poised to clash in two separate yet concurrent battles on different fronts in central Germany. The Prussian army had not fully deployed its forces, and its preparations were incomplete, while the French troops, led by Napoleon and Davout, were rapidly advancing toward the decisive encounter. At Jena, Napoleon positioned his troops on high ground, overlooking a vast plain, an advantageous spot that gave his forces a clear view of the battlefield. The French army numbered around 50,000 men, while the Prussians under Prince Hohenlohe had approximately 38,000 troops. Although the Prussians had some reserves, their defensive strategy lacked coherence and was no match for the speed and flexibility of the French. Napoleon began the battle in the morning by sending forward his vanguard to apply pressure on the Prussian lines, taking advantage of the thick fog that shrouded the area to conceal his movements. He brought his heavy artillery forward, and French shells began bombarding the Prussian positions. Soon, a coordinated French attack struck the Prussian right flank, throwing its lines into disarray. The Prussian commanders tried to rally their defenses and launch counterattacks, but thanks to Napoleon's corps system, the French army could quickly reposition and respond effectively to any enemy movement. As the hours passed, French pressure mounted, especially after Napoleon sent in reinforcements led by Marshal Lannes. By midday, the Prussian forces began retreating in disarray, and the withdrawal turned into a full rout when French cavalry broke through the rear, causing complete collapse and mass flight from the battlefield. Meanwhile, about 30 kilometers north of Jena, a fiercer battle was raging at Auerstedt between the main Prussian army, led by the Duke of Brunswick, and French forces under Marshal Davout. Davout had only 26,000 men facing some 63,000 Prussians. Despite the overwhelming numerical disadvantage, he achieved a remarkable victory through discipline and clever tactics. The battle began when the French vanguard collided with Prussian forces near the village of Hassenhausen. Clashes broke out quickly, and Davout realized he was facing a much larger army than expected. Yet he refused to retreat. Instead, he ordered his troops to hold their ground and absorb the initial Prussian assaults while deploying artillery to support his front lines. The Prussians attempted a strong counterattack, but Davout's forces demonstrated extraordinary resilience, repelling multiple breakthrough attempts. Midway through the battle, the Duke of Brunswick was fatally wounded, throwing the Prussian command into confusion. Davout seized this critical moment to launch a full-scale counteroffensive, with French infantry and cavalry tearing through the fragmented Prussian lines. By late afternoon, the Prussian army began to withdraw, pursued relentlessly by the French. Thousands of Prussian soldiers were forced to surrender, while many others were killed or captured in one of the most disastrous defeats in Prussian military history. By nightfall, the Prussian army had collapsed completely in both battles. With their soldiers fleeing and units scattered, the road to Berlin lay wide open for the French, who entered the city just 2 weeks later, effectively ending the war. The twin defeats at Jena and Auerstedt were a military catastrophe for Prussia, temporarily stripping it of great power status and forcing it to rebuild its army from scratch in the following years. The battles of Jena and Auerstedt were not mere French military victories. They marked a pivotal turning point in the Napoleonic Wars. The crushing defeat shattered Prussia's capacity for resistance and redrew the balance of power in Europe. The political and military consequences of these battles were far-reaching, with direct implications for the European order in the decades that followed. After the fighting ended on October 14, 1806, the Prussian army began a chaotic retreat. Soldiers fled without coordination, and military units dispersed across the German countryside. The Prussian high command lost all control over its forces, and there was no realistic chance of regrouping or organizing an effective defense. In the days and weeks that followed, French forces under Napoleon and his marshals launched an aggressive pursuit of the fleeing Prussians, leading to the surrender of entire units without notable resistance. On October 27, 1806, Napoleon entered Berlin in a symbolic scene that reflected Prussia's total defeat. It was an unprecedented event, as the Prussian capital had not fallen to a foreign enemy for centuries. The French army rapidly advanced toward the remnants of Prussian forces, capturing major cities and fortresses one after another. By the end of the year, only a few isolated pockets of resistance remained, and King Frederick William III had no choice but to flee to eastern Prussia in search of Russian support to save what remained of his kingdom. The battles revealed the vast gap between traditional Prussian military doctrine and the modern strategies employed by Napoleon. While the Prussian army still relied on outdated tactics from the time of Frederick the Great, the French corps system allowed for greater maneuverability and operational independence. The French army's agility and capacity for rapid deployment were decisive factors, enabling Napoleon to implement his plans swiftly, while Prussian leaders struggled with slow decision-making and poor coordination. The military implications extended beyond Prussia. Other European powers, such as Russia and Austria, realized that traditional methods of warfare were no longer sufficient to defeat Napoleon. This recognition triggered military reforms across the continent, as armies began studying and adopting Napoleonic tactics to avoid sharing Prussia's fate. The defeat at Jena and Auerstedt also delivered a severe political blow to the Prussian monarchy. The regime lost its prestige and came under Napoleon's control, who imposed harsh terms in the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807. These terms included the loss of vast territories, with large areas of German land ceded to France and its allies, significantly shrinking the kingdom and weakening its influence in European affairs. In addition, Napoleon enforced administrative and political reforms in Prussia, abolishing many of the nobility's traditional privileges and introducing revolutionary French ideas such as legal equality and modern governance. Though these changes were imposed by the occupying French forces, they laid the groundwork for future reform movements within Prussia. After the defeat, Prussian leaders recognized that their army could not survive in its current form and began comprehensive reforms. This military rebuilding was led by prominent figures such as Gerhard von Scharnhorst and August von Gneisenau. The reforms focused on restructuring the army, introducing new training systems, and eliminating outdated military traditions. A universal conscription system was introduced, enabling the training of large numbers of soldiers in short rotations and creating a vast reserve force. New tactics emphasizing speed and flexibility, modeled on French battlefield success, were developed. By 1813, the Prussian army had recovered significantly and was ready to join the Sixth Coalition, which ultimately brought down Napoleon a few years later. Napoleon's victory at Jena and Auerstedt solidified his dominance over Europe, but it also motivated his enemies to learn from their mistakes and prepare new methods to confront him. These battles were among the key events that made European powers realize that defeating France required a broad coalition and sweeping modernization of their traditional armies. Although Napoleon continued to achieve victories for several more years, Prussia re-emerged as a formidable military power after rebuilding its army. When the German War of Liberation broke out in 1813, Prussia played a central role in defeating Napoleon, leading eventually to his downfall and the end of the Napoleonic Wars. The battles of Jena and Auerstedt were not just French military triumphs, they were transformative moments in European history. While the defeats temporarily brought down Prussia, they also forced it to undertake profound reforms that enabled its return as a great power. These battles underscored the importance of military and tactical modernization in modern warfare, a lesson that shaped European armies for decades to come. As such, these battles were turning points that reshaped Europe and paved the way for new conflicts that would define the continent's future.